We'd like to invite everyone to please settle down as we will begin in a short while. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues in the government and the academe, members of the diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We'd also like to welcome our guests from all over the world who are joining us via Facebook live stream. Thank you for tuning in. The Foreign Service Institute welcomes you to today's Mabini Dialogue on Moral Governance and Ethical Leadership with His Excellency, the Most Reverend Archbishop Paul R. Gallagher. Allow me to introduce our distinguished speaker. The Most Reverend Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher is the Secretary for Relations with States and International Organizations of the Holy See. Born in Liverpool, the UK, His Excellency was educated at St. Francis Xavier School, Liverpool, and was ordained to the priesthood in 1977. He studied at the Pontifical Ecclesiastical Academy in Rome, the premier training ground for Vatican diplomats, graduating in 1984 with a doctorate in canon law. His initial diplomatic assignments spanned 3 continents: Tanzania in Africa, Uruguay in South America, and the Philippines in Asia. He also served as the Apostolic Nuncio in Burundi, Guatemala, and Australia. On November 8, 2014, Pope Francis appointed him as Secretary for Relations with States and International Organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, with a warm round of applause, let us welcome His Excellency, the Most Reverend Archbishop Paul R. Gallagher.
Mr. Director General, esteemed authorities of this institution, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to extend my warm greetings to the distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps present here today, as well as to the students and the academic and administrative staff of this important institution, which serves, as stated in its founding law, as the center for the development and professionalization of the career corps of the Foreign Service of the Department and other government agencies with offices and employees assigned abroad. I am sincerely grateful for the privilege of addressing you today about the distinct and significant nature of diplomacy, which I have personally regarded and experienced as a cornerstone in the promotion of peace and goodwill. On a personal note, it brings me great joy to reconnect with acquaintances from the past, nurturing friendships and connections that originated during my tenure as Counselor of the Apostolic Nunciature in Manila from 1991 to 1995. In our current era, we find ourselves amidst both promise and peril. On the one hand, there is an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, technical knowledge, and people, underscoring the interconnectedness of nations. Information and ideas travel globally at unprecedented speeds, while technological advancements and economic growth have profoundly reshaped international relations. However, this interconnectedness also exposes vulnerabilities. Nations increasingly prioritize their own interests, sometimes neglecting collaborative solutions to pressing global challenges such as environmental degradation, climate change, and humanitarian crises. Multilateral institutions, originally established following World War II to uphold peace and security, now face strain under the weight of conflicting national interests and agenda. These crises demand global solutions, but also risk escalating tensions as nations vie for resources and influence, potentially leading to new zones of conflict. As Pope Francis reminds us in his encyclical letter Laudate Deum, our world has become so multipolar and at the same time so complex that a different framework for effective cooperation is required. It is not enough to think only of balances of power, but also of the need to provide a response to new problems and to react with global mechanisms to environmental, public health, cultural, and social challenges, especially to consolidate respect for the most elementary human rights, social rights, and the protection of our common home. It is a matter of establishing global and effective rules that can permit providing for this global safeguarding. End of the quotation. In light of these complex realities, some may question the Holy See's approach and its insistence on positive neutrality in state affairs and international relations. They might view this stance as outdated in today's world, possibly even advocating for relegating the Holy See to irrelevant obscurity. However, such perspectives overlook the timeless principles that underpin the Holy See's diplomacy and its enduring relevance in the 21st century. They also fail to recognize the Holy See's distinct role in addressing cultural and religion-based conflicts worldwide, free from territorial, political, or material ambitions. Rather than pursuing power or dominance, the Holy See's diplomatic efforts are rooted in principles that prioritize the welfare of all humanity, uphold human dignity, and advocate for lasting peace. It seeks to confront the urgent issues of our time by championing the common good, solidarity among nations, and subsidiarity. Throughout our discussion today, we will delve into the exceptional and distinctive role that the Holy See plays in international diplomacy, emphasizing its ongoing commitment to the comprehensive well-being of the human family. Firstly, the Holy See as a relevant transnational player. Embodying the universality of the Catholic Church, the Holy See occupies a distinctive and unparalleled position on the global stage. Unlike conventional states, its mission transcends temporal, political, or material interests, focusing on profound religious and moral matters that transcend national and transnational concerns. This grants the Holy See a singular and influential role in global affairs, with its influence stemming from a rich history of shaping moral policies with extensive social, political, and economic impacts through its diplomatic approach. As Pope St. Paul VI emphasized, this approach pursues the common good rather than personal gain or advantage. The Holy See's international juridical status, as articulated by my revered predecessor, the late Cardinal Jean-Louis Torrent, sets it apart as a sovereign and independent moral authority. This status enables the Holy See to engage actively in international relations, advocating for a higher ethical standard in interreactions among the various stakeholders in the international community. This moral authority transcends geographical boundaries, temporal constraints, and political affiliations, positioning the Holy See as a pivotal actor on the global stage. It consistently denounces actions that undermine human dignity, curtail freedom, or oppress people. In this regard, one of the remarkable attributes of the Holy See's influence is its reliance on moral persuasion and the gifts of the Spirit, often described as soft power. This form of benevolent power enables the Holy See to achieve results that even the most dominant global authorities often struggle to attain on their own. Its influence is subtle, yet profound in its selflessness and desire for the good of man, reaching toward the deepest values and convictions of people worldwide, and serving as a force for moral guidance and ethical leadership in a society where self-referential political power normally falls short. Naturally, it follows that the Holy See also engages in effective, often behind-the-scenes, bilateral efforts on issues closely aligned with its commitment to human rights, leveraging the influence of its extensive global network. The Holy See advances its agenda through strategic cooperation and partnerships with nations, organizations, and people of goodwill who share its dedication to fundamental human rights and human dignity. In this manner, it extends its reach, using its moral influence to promote justice, peace, and solidarity on an international scale. For this reason, the sui generis presence of the Holy See on the international stage surpasses conventional statecraft, transcending the traditional realms of interstate relations. It steadfastly maintains its independence from political alliances and blocs, choosing cooperation and peace mediation over the more divisive aspects of politics. This allows it to play the role of a trustworthy mediator, which is paramount in addressing conflicts and fostering dialogue on global issues. By emphasizing cooperation over confrontation, as well as the ideals of solidarity and subsidiarity, the Holy See is able to build bridges where others may only see insurmountable divides. Secondly, the Pope as the primary actor on the Holy See's diplomacy. The Holy Father, who occupies the Sancta Sedes, serves as the central figure in the diplomatic efforts of the Holy See, and the world looks to him as his words and actions serve as the driving force behind the diplomatic activities of the Holy See. In line with his predecessors, Pope Francis deploys his soft power directly by translating his spiritual and moral authority into action within the wider arena. His statements, initiatives, and engagements promote the interests of the Church, humanity, and common good, particularly in the defense of human rights, dignity, the integral human development of every individual, and the care for the common home. In recent times, with Pope Francis's vision, the diplomacy of the Holy See has seen a local advocate in addressing issues of global poverty, intertwining it with other pressing concerns such as climate change and migration. Furthermore, the Pope has pressed for more conscientiousness on the advocacy for peace and non-violence, both as universal global norms and as specific calls to action in conflict-ridden areas. The Pope, as the universal pastor of the Church, exercises his soft power indirectly by inspiring the global community to champion related initiatives and policy preferences within their secular roles. His steadfast commitment to a church for the poor and of mercy lies at the heart of this effort, underscoring the Church's role as a field hospital for the marginalized and those in need. This overarching commitment to the gospel of Christ and the traditional teaching of the Catholic Church is the driving force behind his calls for reform, not only on the international institutions, but also within the Church, as he challenges internal struggles, revitalizes synodal governments, and urges the Church to steer clear of culture war politics by being more open to authentic, truth-seeking dialogue. The indirect exercise of soft power underscores the multifaceted role of the papacy in contemporary international relations. While the Pope's political role has evolved over time, his office remains formally and diplomatically recognized in the 21st century. He wields influence through personal interaction with world leaders and his unparalleled impact on the spiritual and moral consciences of the global community. His exceptional authority can catalyze peace negotiations and humanitarian interventions, contributing to conflict resolution. The Latin origin of the word pope, pontifex, literally means a bridge builder, and this is precisely the scope of the diplomacy of the Holy See. Acting as a bridge builder, the Pope mediates in conflicts and fosters dialogue between nations, employing positive neutrality and a compassionate perspective to reduce tensions and promote peace. A recent example illustrating the Pope's personal approach to exercising ethical and political leadership occurred during his address at the Intergovernmental Forum of G7 leaders on June 14th in Bari, Italy. In this speech, he offered a profound reflection on the future of humanity and the imperative of cultivating healthy politics. He stated, "Global society is suffering from grave structural deficiencies that cannot be resolved by piecemeal solutions or quick fixes. Much needs to change through fundamental reform and major renewal. Only a healthy politics involving the most diverse sectors and skills is capable of overseeing this process. An economy that is an integral part of a political, social, cultural, and popular program directed to the common good could pave the way for different possibilities which do not involve stifling human creativity and its ideals of progress, but rather directing that energy along new channels." End of the quotation. The international trips of the Holy Father serve as significant diplomatic moments for the Holy See, providing opportunities for direct engagement with political and civil society leaders. These visits represent a primary means through which the Holy Father fulfills his unique mission to the world. Reflecting on the 4 visits made by popes to your esteemed country, Pope St. Paul VI in 1970, followed by Pope St. John Paul II in 1981 and 1995, and Pope Francis in 2015, these occasions underscore the importance of personal interaction in advancing the Holy See's diplomatic efforts. All diplomatic endeavors of the Holy See extend from the Holy Father's ministry and are overseen primarily by the Secretary of State and the network of papal representatives worldwide. Many of these representatives operate in conflict zones and areas affected by war, bearing witness to the Holy Father's profound concern for those suffering from conflict. Pope Francis has articulated that diplomacy's role is to foster a climate of reciprocal cooperation and trust for the sake of satisfying common needs. He emphasizes diplomacy as an act of humility, requiring individuals to set aside self-regard to build relationships based on understanding and mutual respect. He underscores that true diplomacy is rooted in sincere openness, encouraging communities to seek goodness and promoting mutual advancement while embracing diverse perspectives through dialogue and understanding. Fundamentally, this openness is grounded in charity and fosters bonds of understanding, cultivating relationships that offer hope even in the darkest times. Thirdly, the foreign policy of the Holy See, moral responsibility, and Christian realism. In the face of challenges like the diminishing sense of unity among nations, there is a compelling need for the international community to come together and collectively aim to seek the common good to address the growing challenges that affect all of humanity. How can the Holy See's unique diplomacy contribute in guiding humanity? How might diplomacy and dialogue effectively address conflicts, advance development, and foster harmonious relationships among peoples? Regrettably, we must acknowledge a troubling absence of solidarity in our collective approach to shared challenges. As I mentioned in my speech at last year's general debate at the high-level week of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, we have seen crumbling trust among nations, evident in the increasing number and severity of conflicts and wars. In this difficult context, the Holy See's global involvement contributes to the creation of a space marked by solidarity, cooperation, and mutual trust. Its influence encompasses various elements, including an education in its long tradition and art of peacemaking. Its aim is to break the cycle so that individuals, nations, and peoples can move away from the patterns of war, resentment, and hatred. Instead, they are encouraged to progress along the path of dialogue, guided by the rule of law as well as natural law, rather than the law of force, fostering honest and cordial relations among nations and peoples instead of mutual suspicion. Moral responsibility. Moral responsibility or duty is a prominent concept frequently discussed in political discourse and theoretical debates. However, there is ongoing disagreement regarding how it can be effectively applied in practice. When tackling global challenges such as global poverty, combating atrocities, or addressing issues related to artificial intelligence, the approaches often tend to rely on retrospective accounts of responsibility that focus on non-compliance with regulatory frameworks. Consequently, situations requiring prospective responsibility are frequently left unaddressed, often to the detriment of the common good. Papal diplomacy sees moral responsibility as a critical element in fostering harmonious relations between individuals and communities, both within and among nations. Once again, as the late Cardinal Jean-Louis Tron noted, its action as a moral authority aims at furthering an ethic of relations between the different protagonists of the international community. Amidst universal challenges that necessitate collective responsive, diplomacy anchored in transcendent objective values and shared moral responsibility offers a robust framework. By prioritizing the well-being of the human family over individual or national interests, such diplomacy fosters collaborative and resilient international relations. Allow me to briefly describe how moral responsibility is articulated in various questions of international concern today. To human dignity and pursuit of happiness. The Holy See's commitment to defending human rights and its unwavering stance on issues such as the right to life and the dignity of every individual as children of God are central to its mission. Rooted in the belief that all people are equally loved and created by God, the Holy See advocates for the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. This includes promoting freedom, education, social and economic opportunities, and political participation to enable individuals to live fully. By championing these rights, the Holy See not only sets a moral standard, but also sparks vital debates on the global stage. A fundamental tenet of papal diplomacy is its focus on safeguarding human rights and fostering reconciliation, recognizing these as crucial prerequisites for genuine peace among individuals and nations. Pope Francis has consistently urged humanity to acknowledge our shared fundamental values and to combat divisive forces such as tribalism, regionalism, and ethnic differences. He emphasizes the necessity of dialogue and inclusiveness, essential for the cohesive development of society. To environmental stewardship. The Holy See's commitment to environmental stewardship, exemplified in Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si and the apostolic exhortation Laudate Deum, places significant emphasis on the moral obligation to protect the planet and combat climate change. The current catastrophic ecological crisis, which has progressively affected many societies, presents a crucial moment for both individual and collective action, a moral duty to prevent and address the increasingly frequent and severe impacts of climate change on societies, nations, and cultures. This call by God, starting in Genesis, asks each of us to be good stewards and extends beyond mere environmental concerns. It underscores the broader commitment to the well-being and sustainable future of our planet and all its inhabitants. To combat throwaway culture. Pope Francis frequently addresses the rising phenomenon of throwaway culture, highlighting its detrimental impact on society. This mindset, characterized by excessive consumerism and disposability, not only contributes to environmental degradation through increased waste and resource depletion, but also fosters economic inefficiency by prioritizing short-term gains over sustainability. At its core, the throwaway culture diminishes human dignity by valuing individuals solely based on their utility. This attitude particularly affects vulnerable groups such as the unborn, the elderly, the needy, and migrants, often marginalizing them and hindering their integration and development within society. Pope Francis emphasizes that this mindset perpetuates what he calls a globalization of indifference, where human worth is reduced to productivity and material possessions. Moreover, Pope Francis has raised concerns about the impact of technological advancements and globalization on the workforce. He warns that while these developments can enhance efficiency, they also risk displacing workers and undermining their ability to contribute meaningfully to society, thus posing ethical challenges and exacerbating social inequalities. This same concern applies to the rise of artificial intelligence, which, if not properly contextualized and regulated, could have serious ethical implications and consequences for humanity as a whole. Pope Francis consistently calls on the international community to address this globalization of indifference and shift the world's attitude to its opposite, which he refers to as a culture of encounter. This culture of encounter has far-reaching effects on both individuals and society at large, as it involves the globalization of fraternity, a proposal to help restore a sense of shared identity as a global human family in an age of increasing connectivity, but also alienation. In this regard, human fraternity counters indifferent attitudes by crafting policies that adopt a more inclusive approach, valuing and respecting cultural differences. By doing so, an inclusive and fraternal system in the international sphere can regain credibility and effectively address global challenges, encouraging humanity to collaborate and find common solutions for the benefit of all. Diplomacy using Christian realism. These articulations of our moral responsibility are at the basis of papal diplomacy. However, these principles must not remain mere ideas, but rather put into practice in a realistic, concrete fashion. For this reason, Pope Francis continuously underscores the importance of dialogue between realities and ideas, emphasizing that realities are greater than ideas. He warns against the disconnect between ideas and the actual world, which can lead to ineffective forms of idealism and nominalism that merely classify and define without prompting action. This principle of Christian realism is also applicable to the realm of diplomacy, where the art of managing international relations is firmly grounded in the real world, addressing practical challenges and seeking tangible solutions. Realism, a school of thought in international relations, can be applied to foreign policy in service of the greater good. It focuses on key principles such as seeking a balance among nations and preventing the dominance of any one state, which could have consequences for regional and global stability. A realist foreign policy prioritizes the welfare, security, and stability of nations, creating conditions where all parties can thrive, fostering economic development and well-being. While many political perspectives emphasize realism as driven by power and self-interest, the Holy See's approach to realism offers a distinctive perspective. It does not prioritize seeking influence or exclusivity, but rather embodies a Christian realism that aims to unite communities and individuals in addressing a broad spectrum of critical social issues. In the realm of international politics, where power dynamics can often dominate, this approach seeks to strike a balance between influence and moral principles. It integrates moral and ethical values with pragmatic strategies for diplomacy that is effective and equitable, while acknowledging the inherent complexities of international relations. It navigates the global landscape by upholding truth and embodying principles of faith, hope, and charity, striving to achieve the most favorable outcome possible. While the list might not be exhaustive, allow me to highlight some examples of this realism present in the policies of the Holy See. Access to health. Pope Francis, in his January 16, 2023 address to representatives of medical professions, underscored that health is a fundamental human right, and access to healthcare services should not be treated as a privilege. The Holy See consistently calls upon all parties to recognize this essential right to health while upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, conscience, and religion. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed the vulnerability of existing healthcare systems, highlighting the necessity of establishing mechanisms to ensure the provision of medicines and adequate healthcare for all, while also respecting the cultural sensitivities and sovereignty of each country. Furthermore, in the spirit of solidarity, sharing scientific knowledge and expertise on an international scale is crucial for the well-being of the global community. Advocacy for just economic policies and equal opportunities. The Holy See's diplomacy emphasizes the need for economic systems that prioritize fairness and justice, recognizing that inequality is the most significant economic issue of our time, affecting everyone, not just the poor. Therefore, it calls on stakeholders to understand the importance of seeking adequate mechanisms for the redistribution of wealth, the promotion of growth, and cooperation for development. Furthermore, in the efforts to eradicate poverty, the Holy See calls for an integrated approach that combines monetary measures with comprehensive policies to address the non-monetary deprivations faced by millions of people at the educational, social, political, cultural, and spiritual levels. In a recent address, Pope Francis cautioned about neglecting human beings in the pursuit of a circular economy, stating that while there is much sensibility in recycling discarded materials and waste, the same does not apply to recycling people, especially the most vulnerable workers who are often marginalized. He warned against a form of meritocracy that justifies the exclusion of the poor, unfairly judged as lacking merit, and even considers poverty itself as a personal failing. Pope Francis has urged for a shift beyond mere philanthropy, calling instead for the integration of the poor into companies and societies, where they can contribute as valuable resources for the common good. Global solidarity and fraternity. In the face of the challenges and the increasing humanitarian crisis driven by socio-political circumstances and the rise of migration, refugees, and internally displaced persons, papal diplomacy plays a significant role in fostering a sense of global solidarity. This aligns with the Christian call for fraternity and unity among all people. Solidarity, as Pope Francis puts it, should never be confused with charitable assistance, but should be understood as a means of creating opportunities for all to live with dignity. He further adds that while solidarity is the principle of social planning that allows those who are disadvantaged to become equals, fraternity is what allows equals to be diverse. Thus, solidarity and fraternity foster a broader and more effective action for the meeting of peoples, for cooperation according to their free and authentic national sensibilities. Fighting human trafficking and other forms of modern slavery. Pope Francis is universally recognized as the leading moral voice in the fight against human trafficking. Human trafficking, he said, is an open wound on the body of contemporary society, a scourge upon the body of Christ, a crime against humanity. If we are going to combat effectively this toxic scourge, we must block its tributaries and address its root causes, such as extreme poverty, corruption in governance, injustice and exclusion in the economic field, and the ethical degeneration that occurs when people are treated as objects. In the Pope's words, victims of modern forms of slavery are deceived, assaulted, often sold many times for different purposes, and in the end killed, or in any case physically and mentally harmed, ending up discarded and abandoned. The Pope exhorts us that now is the time for action. Promotion of multilateralism. The Holy See often supports international organizations and diplomacy as a means to address global challenges, emphasizing cooperation and unity among nations. I wish to reiterate the appeal I made during the general debate of the General Assembly's 78th session last September. There is a need to reinforce the multilateral systems return to listening and dialogue as a means to resolve conflicts and reduce human suffering. Any reform of the international system should prioritize making existing structures more efficient and relevant to the modern era, with a focus on rebuilding trust and healthy relations between nations to promote peace and security. One way of making the multilateral system more effective is through adopting a bottom-up approach. That is, in fact, the application of the principle of subsidiarity to international diplomacy. As Pope Francis has said, globalization favors spontaneous cultural interchanges, greater mutual knowledge, and processes of integration of peoples, which end up provoking a multilateralism front below, and not simply one determined by the elites of power. The demands that rise up from below throughout the world, where activists from very different countries help and support one another, can end up pressuring the sources of power. Religious freedom and peace. Religious freedom is a cornerstone of human rights and an essential requirement of the dignity of every person. Unfortunately, throughout history and continuing into the present day, religion has often been instrumentalized to fuel political disputes. Inauthentic expressions of religion have even led to some of the cruelest forms of discrimination, violence, and war. On the other hand, and perhaps in reaction to such acts of so-called religious extremism, in the West, secularism can sometimes marginalize freedom of religion, thought, and belief, contributing to the intolerance and discrimination of religious individuals and their communities. In response to these challenges, the Holy See upholds that religious freedom is not only a human right, but also a vital path toward healing divisions and promoting global peace. When individuals are free to worship without interference, it becomes evident that religious differences do not inherently create enemies, but define individual identities. As Pope Francis aptly suggests in Evangelii Gaudium, what is needed in this area is a healthy pluralism, one which genuinely respects differences and values them as such, without privatizing religions or relegating them to enclosed precincts of churches, synagogues, or mosques. It is from this perspective that the Holy See has often been obligated to defend this fundamental human right, as it is foundational to each person's identity and to the free exercise of one's liberty, for the integral development of each person and of society as a whole. By emphasizing religious tolerance, advocating for legal protections, and participating in international fora, the Holy See contributes to the discourse on religious freedom and plays a pivotal role in advocating for peace, reconciliation, and non-violent conflict resolution. Ongoing conflicts. Finally, a word on how the Holy See is acting in the context of some of today's most dramatic hot fronts. These conflicts remind us, if we ever needed reminding, of today's serious instability, the result of the dissolution of an order we believed had been established following 2 world wars and the Cold War. Today, there seems to be a lack of trust, particularly in international law and the institutions that uphold it, which had acted as pillars of global stability for decades. Now they seem powerless against these new and complex challenges. When addressing these conflicts, it is essential to understand that defense is not solely about military might, but also about fostering institutions and promoting agreements between peoples. The Church, the Holy See, and the Pope are dedicated to working for peace and advocating for peaceful resolutions. In today's world, achieving a clear solution through victory or defeat is unrealistic. As Pope Francis has said, with war, everything is lost. Everything. There is no victory in a war. Everything is defeated. A more sustainable path lies in establishing a new, just order that transcends the West-East or North-South divisions, knowing the complexity of alliances and collaborations that recognize human dignity and the agency of different peoples in the international community. The world stands at a critical juncture where diplomatic interaction will either enrich our societies or encourage further tensions and conflicts. Confronted with these challenges, there is a shared sentiment and a profound belief that collaborative approaches among nations hold a unique capacity to instill hope, promise peace, foster mutual understanding, and ultimately resolve complex and interwoven global issues. In the face of what the Holy Father calls the Third World War fought piecemeal, or phenomena such as the arms race, the nuclear threat, and terrorism, the Holy See and the structures of diplomacy are united by the same task, to be a sign of hope, a sign, that is, that conflicts are not inescapable, but rather can be overcome through dialogue. In this perspective, the specific diplomacy of the Holy See becomes an instrument at the service of human coexistence and a voice that reaffirms on every possible occasion the common aspiration to stability, security, and peace. A peace, however, that is not a mere balance of forces, but a true peace founded on justice. The foreign policy of the Holy See assumes a vital role in this context by advocating for diplomacy grounded in dialogue, bridge building, and active engagement, with a focus on addressing social concerns that bear significant political implications. While some may question why the Holy See, the Church, and the Pope immerse themselves in controversial social and political matters, I hope that today's conversation has illustrated how the straightforward answer lies in their inherent nature and calling. As articulated by the Second Vatican Council, the Church shares in the joys, sorrows, and concerns of people in this era, particularly those who are poor and suffering, for these concerns are also the concerns of Christ's followers. In this spirit, The diplomatic activity of the Holy See, as encouraged by all modern popes, including Pope Francis, seeks to embrace the world's joys and sorrows, confront challenges, and actively participate in dialogue and encounters, much like a field hospital amid a battle. Ladies and gentlemen, lastly, it is crucial to note that while the Holy See and the Church play a distinctive role, they refrain from aligning with specific political or ideological positions, so as to maintain their unique identity and influence on the global stage. To some, blending spirituality with diplomatic polity may appear contradictory, given that diplomacy is often associated with strategic maneuvering and formal receptions. However, the Holy See emphasizes a pastoral and spiritual form of diplomacy which it believes benefits the community rather than the practitioner. This form of diplomacy is an essential skill for leaders who prioritize the common good and serve selflessly. As understood in this context, diplomacy is a charism, a gift that benefits the entire community, not just the individual exercising it. This comprehensive view of papal diplomacy reveals that the Holy See's engagement aims to help the community of nations achieve significant human aspirations, such as peace between nations, domestic harmony, and the progress of each country. In conclusion, allow me to echo the sentiments and aspirations expressed by the Holy Father during his apostolic visit to the Philippines in 2015, which remain relevant as your nation confronts its own challenges. The Philippines plays a crucial role in promoting regional cooperation in Asia and shaping a more humane and inclusive society, highlighted by the significant contributions of Filipinos in the diaspora to their host societies. The Holy Father encourages Filipinos to draw strength from their cultural and religious values to foster integral human development and promote dialogue among different religious communities. He expresses hope that efforts towards peace in your country will uphold its foundational principles and respect the rights of indigenous peoples and religious minorities. May these sentiments be a beacon for you as you strive to implement a diplomacy that builds bridges, fosters unity, and promotes the integral human development of all in your country. Thank you for your kind attention. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Excellency, for that thought-provoking and insightful speech. At this point, we will now be opening the floor for questions. We have time for at least 2 questions. Yes, Asek?
Greetings, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. How would you speak to the post-Christian environment of international relations now, where it's a post-Christian world in Western Europe, large parts of the United States, the rise of AI, which is dehumanizing? It's supposed to replace humans for the sake of efficiency and results. And thank you, sir, for emphasizing the need for moral sanctuaries. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your question. To some extent, I'm going to disagree with you, in that I think that one of the things that we know is that, shall we say, the Western view of the world is not very accurate. Religion remains deeply important for the vast majority of the people on this planet. Perhaps not a religion that is well known to the West, but a religion very pluralistic, very different, and a religion which is so at the core of people. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be taking realistic religious indifference and secularism in the West. But to be honest as well, things are changing a little. There is a great deal of effort, we know this, in diplomatic corps, in diplomatic institutions like your own around the world, to combat religious illiteracy. where people do not understand very much about religion, about the religions of the world, and the basic beliefs thereof. And things are changing. A number of years ago, I gave a lecture at the Foreign Office in London, which was part of a course which they were promoting at that time, and still continues, not without its difficulties, I'm told, to try and combat this ignorance of religion. But I think that it's something that, as in anything, you know, that the people believe or take notice of something, not because of really what you say, but because what you do. As we said, we don't need, in some ways, we don't need prophets. Sometimes we don't need people like me going around making big speeches in a place like Manila. What we need is authentic people living their faith, whatever their faith is. And as we know, most of the great religions of the world have many elements in common which we can share, I think. And I think we should, and that's why interreligious dialogue is so important, why sharing our insights, and also by supporting communities. And one of the things that I hopefully, and I'm pretty convinced that this is the case from what I've heard in my contacts already here in these days, and speaking yesterday with the Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, that the Philippine institutions around the world are striving to be supportive of your people, supportive of their communities, and also supportive of their faith. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir in maroon, the last question. Thank you.
Good morning, Archbishop Gallagher. I'm Paterno S. Maquel from the news website Rappler. Archbishop Gallagher, in his apostolic exhortation Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis emphasizes that the most important goal of the Catholic Church is evangelization. How does papal diplomacy help achieve this goal? And how does the Holy See ensure that its diplomacy does not turn into a subtle form of proselytism or making non-Catholics accept Catholic doctrines? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, obviously, if our diplomatic actions are not animated or not inspired by our faith, they're going to be very hollow. People will see through it very quickly. So I think it's always going to be inherently an act of evangelization, in the sense that it is a way of enunciating your faith and proclaiming your faith, which is very different from ramming it down people's throats. People very much want to meet, shall we say, people in the diplomatic corps of the Holy See, where priests and bishops and others, collaborators with us. They want to meet people who are authentically Catholic in their faith and in their vision of life. The avoidance of proselytism, I think, is really quite easy. It's just that's based on respect of other people's consciences and where they're at. And if you do that, then you're certainly not going to be trying to deceive them or obtain their faith in a false and in a deceitful way. It's a matter of being an authentic person, really. And anybody who is, shall we say, truly like that does not want to obtain disciples through deceit. Anyway, because if you're going to do that, their faith will not last. They will immediately see all the contradictions and the problems which we have in the church, and they say, well, this is not what I was attracted to. If you see the true essential element of our faith, which is at the end of the thing, is faith in Jesus Christ. Then, if they see that, then they will be able to also pass through all that realism that we have to do in our pilgrimage of faith, where we see not everybody lives up to their faith. There are scandals in the church. There are problems and things. But if you have a strong faith in Jesus Christ, these things, I'm not saying they're not significant, but they're not really what determine whether you continue to believe, whether you continue to frequent your community, to go to church, and ultimately whether you continue to pray. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will now be closing our question and answer portion. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and enriching the discussion with your questions. So I would like to invite FSI Director General Francisco Noel R. Fernandez III to present the token. Sir?
Yeah.
Thank you, Excellency, the Most Reverend Archbishop Paul R. Gallagher, for taking the time and sharing your insights with us. To our audience, we kindly ask you to take a few minutes of your time to answer the customer satisfaction survey to help us improve our future events. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our program for today. Thank you for joining us in today's Mabini Dialogue, Moral Governance and Ethical Leadership.